All right. So we are on chapter 4, day 2. It's 11:55 a.m. Remember, they were on the island. They were eating that fruit that made them fall asleep, and Will has totally lost his mind. He ran away from them, and then they couldn't go find him because it was dark, and then they'd lose each other, and it was just literally a terrible situation. But now it's the next day at 11:55, so it's almost noon, day 2 on the island. A single ray of tropical sunlight caught the left half of Ian Silkray's glasses. Carefully, the boy angled the lens to reflect the intensified beam onto a pile of leaves on the sand in front of him. There was a breathless silence. Then, it's not burning, Charlotte observed, worried. The leaves are still a little damp. Ian's eyes never wavered from the tiny dot of light concentrated on the brush. No, they aren't, she said. We've been drying them out on the beach for 3 hours. You've seen how it rains here. They're wet. A tiny but clear note of exasperation. Ian had little patience for people who disrupted what was obvious. There was almost inaudible sizzle, and a tiny curl of smoke rose from the pile. And then a newborn flame. Woohoo! So they're making fire. You need fire to survive. That way you can cook things, So they're making fire. Charlotte let out a sigh of relief and realized she'd been holding her breath. Luke was hard at work using the vanes to tie together a framework of branches for a lean-to shelter. He ran over to Charlotte and Ian, arranging kindling in a pyramid around the pile of burning leaves. Soon the fire was going stronger. Larger and thicker pieces were added, and the flames grew. How big does it have to be? Asked Charlotte. Big enough to be spotted from a distance at night, replied Ian. It'll be harder to see during the day, Luke pointed out. True, agreed Ian, but if we notice a plane or a boat, we can pile on wet leaves. That'll make a lot of smoke. Wood gathering was a problem. Since they had no cutting tool, their fire had to be fueled by fallen branches or other dead wood. Stumps and thick logs were rare. Thinner twigs were plentiful, but they burned quickly. That meant a huge amount of wood had to be stockpiled to keep the fire going. The 3 castaways made dozens of trips into the jungle that afternoon, returning with armload after armload of wood. It was back-breaking work. The sun was searingly hot, and the crushing humidity weighed them down as if they were wearing 100-pound packs on their backs. Luke was amazed they were able to do it all. Just yesterday, they had washed up on this island, more dead than alive. It showed what a long drink of water and some solid food could do. In that area, things were improving. Just down the beach, a single spike of coral stuck out of the sand. Charlotte gave it a name. The can opener. Coconut. Oh, I need to sneeze, sorry. Coconuts, tough, round, and stubborn, broke like eggs when smashed against it. That morning, she had shown why she was one of the country's top young athletes. She had shimmied up a 30-foot, she had shimmied up, gone up the palm tree. A 30-foot palm tree as easily as she strolled the beach. From there, she sent a dozen coconuts plummeting to her friends on the ground. After the durans, which was that crazy fruit from yesterday, coconut meat seemed as delicious and sustainable as a 12-course meal. The sweet milk tasted better than any triple chocolate shake Luke could remember. They had also discovered banana trees. Finally, bananas, Charlotte called them, because they were small. Or finger bananas, Charlotte called them, because they were small, as long as an index finger. They were light and sweet and plentiful. It was starting to look like starvation would be the least of their worries. But that was only because they had a lot of worries, Luke reminded himself. Will. He shook his head to clear it. Will was probably okay. They had to look after their own survival first. Then they could search for Will. By mid-afternoon, the shelter was complete. The 3 were as proud as if they'd just built a skyscraper. It definitely wasn't beautiful, but it was a very functional structure. The framework of branches and vines were propped and tied against 2 trees at the edge of the jungle. Into it, they had tightly woven palm fronds to create an angled roof. It won't keep out the rain, Luke had said to Ian, who was the lean-to designer's. We'll put pieces of tree bark on top, Ian decided. If you pile them thick enough, it's perfect for waterproofing. Luke grinned at the boy. Ian had been sent on this trip because his parents were worried that he had no friends and spent all his time watching TV and surfing the internet. But now, those hundreds of hours in front of the Learning Channel and National Geographic Explorer were starting to pay off. Without Ian's know-how, Luke reflected, they would have probably all be dead. Luke and Charlotte took the raft that had carried them to the island and propped it against one open end of their new home, the opposite side, which was going to serve as the entrance. They draped with a long, slightly charred piece of sail from the Phoenix. This had been saved by Ian from the burning boat and used as sun protection on the raft. That left just the back end, the space between the two trees. There, Luke and Charlotte placed another framework of branches with palm fronds basket woven through the twigs. Not exactly the Hilton, Luke said with a shrug, but it'll keep us dry. The sand should be comfortable for sleeping. They had been working nonstop since the sun risen and had awakened them 10 hours earlier. Now the castaways allowed themselves a 30-second period of relaxation. They were exhausted from their labors and still weary from their ordeal on the raft, but when their eyes locked, there was a perfect understanding and arrangement among the three. "Let's go get him," said Ian. Said Ian as they headed into the woods to search for Will. So these kids are smart. They know their friend is missing, but they know they have to take care of themselves in order to survive. So they know they have to take care of their own needs, like shelter and fire, before they can go get their friend. They took care of their own needs. They found food. They have shelter. They have fire. Everything's okay. Well, not everything, but now they're going to go look for Will. Day 2, Chapter 5, 4:40 p.m. At that moment, the three might have not recognized Will, even if they'd found him. In a single night, their friend had changed. His face had been bruised by branches and scratched by the sharp edges of palm fronds during his frantic escape in the pitch black. He couldn't believe how thick the foliage was. At one point, he had stumbled into a sand of ferns so dense that he had been thrown back as if the plants themselves had pushed him away. What was left of his body after that went to the mosquitoes, clouds of them coming in waves like the Air Force on a bomb running. He tried slapping them away at first, but there was far too many, and too much of his skin left uncovered. Eventually, hundreds of bite bumps grew together into a horrible shell of puffy red molted skin. His face felt expanded, deformed. His eyes were swollen partway shut. The discomfort was unbelievable, far more than an itch. His entire body crawled with a churning irritation that scratch only made worse. Okay, so he's got some rough bug bites. Sleep? Ha! Who could sleep in a state like that? Curled into a miserable ball on the ground, roots digging into his side, ants parading over him, mosquitoes. Ugh, mosquitoes! He had broken down during the night, screaming, "How could you do this to me?" At that moment, he didn't care who hurt him or even what happened to him. It was all useless. He didn't even know who he was yelling at. His parents, they had sent their son and daughter halfway around the world for a boat trip. But this couldn't have been their fault. Liza, she was rotten, but sure not rotten enough to do this. Probably she was a victim just like he was. Those kids, Luke, Charla, and that little guy, Ian, Will peered out from behind a leafy fern and watched them disappear in the jungle, calling for them. How did they know his name? They had to be in this somehow. They talked about charting a new course, and Liza. Of course they'd gotten Liza's name from him. If only he could think straight. It must be the mosquitoes. He stepped onto the beach. A tiny droplet of blood hit the sand. He quickly buried it with his tattered sneaker. He didn't want them to know he was watching. He'd woken up with the leech clamped to his cheek. It didn't hurt much. He'd barely noticed it. In fact, over all that itch, but the bite wouldn't stop bleeding. Ew. So a leech, those are like bloodsuckers. So he's starving. He was unconscious for a few days. He has amnesia. And now he's hiding from people and he's literally bleeding. His entire body is covered in bug bites. Like he's having a rough time. Okay. The creatures they had here in Guam, leeches, bugs, lizards, some kind of hairy wild pigs. Remember, they're not actually in Guam. He just thinks they are. Frowning, he squinted at the crude shelter and the bonfire roaring beside it. If those kids were in on this, why were they living like cave people? The shipwreck story, of course, their whole lie was that the Phoenix had sunk and they were marooned here. So they had to act like castaways. Only why bother playing the game in the first place? Will was alone, stranded, defenseless. What threat did he pose to them? His head pounded as he struggled to reason it out. Even though it was daylight, he still saw everything as the same silver gray mist. But there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Maybe it was the sun glare acting on the eyes that were a little more than slits. A fresh blast of fear stiffened his body. They were after him. It was the only explanation. They needed him for something. They couldn't leave until they had to get him. They won't get me. He took a few steps back towards the jungle and froze. This campsite was primitive, but it had fire, which was a lot more than he could say for his own sleeping arrangements. Although this was a hot climate, last night had been damp and chilly. He rummaged through the woodpile and came up with a sturdy twig, which he held to the flame. In a moment, he was wielding a torch. Tonight, he would have his own fire. His swollen eyes fell on the cabin top propped against the side of the shelter. He read the letters N-I-X. N-I-X. Phoenix? He had a sudden fleeting vision of a tall ship, a schooner, 2 masts, her white sails gleaming in the sun as she glided through the harbor. No, impossible. He mustn't let himself be duped. He examined the sheet covering the entrance of the structure. It was canvas, with brown chart around the edging. His fevered mind traveled back to Luke's words from the night before. There was a storm and then the explosion. An explosion? No, he said aloud. They're trying to trick me. He was just about to bolt to run for the trees when he saw it. Just inside the shelter, 2 big bunches of finger bananas. Food. He set the torch down on the fire and attacked the meal so ferociously that it alarmed him. It was over in a minute and he was still hungry, almost as if eating had unleashed his full appetite, and now dozens of peels lay on the sand, evidence of his presence there. He could get rid of them, but that wouldn't explain what happened to all those bananas. He stood up, mind racing. He couldn't let those kids know he was spying on them. He retrieved his torch and held it to the shelter. The dry twig and bark went up like a tinderbox. There, that should destroy the evidence, except for footprints. And Will looked no different than the hundreds made by the 3 kids. No way they'd be able to tell they had a visitor. They'd have to blame the fire on the wind. By the time he reached the trees, the entire lean-to was engulfed in flames. Okay, so the kids just spent an entire stinking day making this shelter for themselves so they'd be safe. And Will, who is in a paranoid state of mind, just lit it on fire. Okay, so that's not very helpful. So what also is going to catch on fire is the canvas, that they use to cover themselves, the whole side of the phoenix that's left. All this stuff's going to be on fire now because Will's crazy. Now I'm mad at Will. Okay, next page. Chapter 6, day 3, 9:05 a.m. Stupid, thought Charla. Stupid. She dropped her armload of twigs on their new shelter. Stupid to put the old one so close to the fire. What a waste of time, she complained. Luke appeared, hauling a thin log that would be one of the main posts. We're marooned on a desert island, he reminded her. Time is the one thing we've got lots of. Big joke, she muttered. He awarded her an encouraging slap on the shoulder. We were dumb. We'll know better next time. We won't put the lean-to where the wind can blow the fire into it. She winced at the memory. By the time they'd returned from looking for Will, there had been nothing left but a pile of ash. Only their raft had been spared. The second blaze, the cabin top, had survived. Although it was badly burned, the half-named Nix was barely visible under the brown scorching. Come on, said Luke. We need more vines. In the jungle, they found Ian snapping branches off a large tree that had fallen over. Jackpot, he called. I'll bet there are enough sticks to fill in the whole roof in front. Soon, a huge pile of twigs sat on the soft ground beside them. Charla gathered up as many as she could carry and started back to the beach. Suddenly, a long, thin shape dropped from a treetop. It landed on Charla's shoulder and quickly wrapped around her neck. Ian made the identification. Snake! Charla tried to wrench it away, but the harder she pulled, the tighter the long body coiled around her. Yeah! Needle-like teeth sunk into the skin just above her wrist. Ian picked up a rock and smacked the snake on its squarish head. Dazed, it loosens its grip, and Luke managed to yank it off Charla. Get rid of it, she commanded. Luke threw. The snake wheeled it away in a whip-like motion. It hit the ground and recovered with lightning quickness, lifting itself nearly vertical. Look at the muscle control, breathed Ian. It's balanced on no more than a few inches of its tail. You know about these things, Luke panted. Ian threw his rock, missing the snake by an inch. In a flash, it darted up a palm tree and disappeared. It's a brown tree snake, he explained. We have to be more careful. There are zillions of them on a Pacific island like these. Never mind that, snapped Charla, holding her bleeding wrist. Is it poisonous? The young boy shook his head. But you don't want the bite to get infected. You should soak it in salt water in the ocean. Good idea, agreed Luke. They turned to Charla. Take a swim. We'll carry the rest of the stuff to the beach. Luckily, it's not poisonous, but you don't want something to get infected on the island because there's not going to be any antibiotics, and that could cause fever. Then, like, if you get a bad infection, like, then you're not going to be able to be saved. With long, powerful strokes, Charla cut through the waves. Her wounded wrist stung a little from the salt, but she was fine, better than fine. She was amazed at how quickly her training had asserted itself. She could almost see the Olympic-sized pool with the Y. Breaststroke, butterfly, backstroke, freestyle. How many lengths had she done in that thing? 1,000, 10,000? At least. All of them timed by her father and of his ever-present stopwatch. She tried to judge her present pace, deducting time from the wave motion and current. A breaker caught her in the face and brought her back to reality. Was she crazy? What did it matter if the swim took 3 seconds or 3 hours? She was shipwrecked in a primitive wilderness. She might not again see civilization, much less any swim team. Only a fanatic would continue training now. Abruptly, she stopped swimming and stood on the sandy bottom. She was a fanatic when it came to training. That was how she'd gotten herself booked on the Phoenix in the first place. On shore, she could see Luke and Ian hauling armloads of wood out of the jungle. She felt a twinge of guilt. She should be helping instead of practicing for an event that's never going to take place. The sooner they finish, the sooner they can continue to search for poor Will. Bright flashes of silver caught her eye, and she looked down into the waist-deep water. A school of foot-long fish darted around her. She experienced a moment of fear. Were they piranhas? She relaxed. Whatever they were, they just seemed curious, investigating a novel shape in their ocean. The next thought to flash through her mind was food. Her years of training had made a healthy eater of her. She always said that she could survive happily on nothing but fruit. But after only a couple of days, if she saw another banana or coconut, she was going to scream. Could she catch a fish with her bare hands? Were these things even edible? Ian would probably know, but by the time she could ask him, the school would be long gone. It was a cruel reality out here in the nature. Yet in a way, it was very fair. No judges to appeal to, no instant reply. You make a mistake and your boat sinks, or your shelter burns down. She was going to do this. She had to do it now, without thinking. A lightning thrust. Ooh, look, that's a text-to-text connection from our vocabulary word this week. A lightning thrust. She stabbed at the water and came up with a wrinkly silver body. Thunderstruck and delighted by her catch, she uttered a piercing shriek and began wading ashore, juggling the fish. Startled by her scream, Luke and Ian raced across the sand to her side. "What's the matter?" barked Luke. "Lunch!" she crowed. "I caught lunch!" "It's a small bonito," put Ian. They looked blank, so he added, "Very edible." Lunch thrashed wildly. "But it's not dead," Luke protested. "Well, make it dead," she insisted. Obediently, Luke reached out and slapped the fish over the head with his open hand. The bonito went on struggling. "Here." Ian held out a short stick, part of their construction material. Luke grabbed it and took a swing just as Charla pulled her hand back. Whack. Ow! Lunch dropped in the wet sand. Before they could react, the bonito flipped away into an oncoming wave and disappeared into the surf. "You were supposed to hit the fish, not me," Charla snapped. "You moved," Luke accused. They stared at each other for a moment and then burst out laughing. Relieved, Ian joined in. As their merriment died down, they heard another sound, not a usual island sound. Insects, birds, lapping in waves. It was mechanical. The drone of a motor, a propeller. Ian was the first to look up. "A plane!" It appeared as a dot in the sky was growing bigger and better defined. It was a twin-engine seaplane, and there was no doubt about it. It was heading for their little island. "They must have seen our fire truck," cried Charla, excitement vibrating in her thin frame. Ian frowned. "You know, the chances that we were spotted within a day because of the small bonfire are 1,000,000 to 1. I don't understand how it could have happened." Luke slapped him on the back. "It happened because we got lucky for a change," he said, choking back tears of emotion. "We've got to find Will. Now we can get him to a doctor." They ran along the shore, waving their arms and cheering. The plane roared right over their heads and started across the island, their pontoons barely clearing the tops of the tree. "Hey, where are they going?" cried Charla. The aircraft disappeared over the jungle. The castaways waited for it to circle back, but it never did. Instead, they heard engines power cut back, indicating descent. A few minutes later, the noise and the motor disappeared altogether. Luke was dumbfounded. Why would they land all the way over there? "They didn't see us," breathed Charla, devastated. Ian thought, it over. Maybe they're not here for us. Maybe there's a village or outpost on the other side of the island. It's still good news, Luke decided. We just have to get over there and ask us to give us a ride somewhere. Even if there's no room for us, at least we can get them to send us help. What if we can't find them? Asked Charla. Luke stared out along the beach. That plane landed in the water. If we follow the shore, we'll hit it sooner or later. Let's not waste any time. Charla waited after him. Charla hurried after him. Wait, called Ian. He picked up a stick and wrote, "We're alive," in the hard, flat sand by the water edge, just in case they come looking for us while we're gone, he explained, rushing to catch up with the others. What started out as a walk along the beach soon got a lot harder. Just around the bend from their campsite, the shady shoreline ended, giving away coral outcroppings and steep cliffs. In places, the rocks were so jagged and unclimbable that the three were forced to venture inland to make it over the rough spots. Keep your eyes on the water, Luke ordered when they had to veer through a dense grove of trees. We don't want to walk right by that plane. How far do you think we've come? Asked Charla, swatting mosquitoes. Ian looked thoughtful. It's hard to say. We're making great time on the beach, but when we have to start climbing, we're doing more up and down than forward. 3, maybe 4 miles. It was like an obstacle course. Much of the coastline was a series of coves shaped like giant bites out of the shore. These had to be followed around or sometimes waded through. High rocks bound the inlets, so the castaways were constantly climbing. As they rose with the terrain, their hopes rose with them, only to be dashed when they reached the top. For there lay another identical cove. The view was breathtaking, spectacular, but they had rescue on their minds. Any view that didn't include a plane was a bitter disappointment. I hope they haven't left already, said Charla. We've been out here for 3 hours. We would have heard the engine, Luke panted, staring down into another inlet. The next rise was a steep one, becoming a sheer cliff near the top. Luckily, there was a grove and leafy sprawling on the crest. Luke was able to hoist Charla high enough to get an arm around one of the narrow trunks. With her gymnast training, she pulled herself to the top. Then, locking her ankles around the base of the tree, she hung herself downward. This allowed the others to use her like a human ladder. They climbed up her athletic body to the flat area of the summit. Look, breathed Ian, pointing. It was a seaplane, not in the next cove, but the one after that. It bobbed gently in the shallow lagoon formed by a curve of coastline and a high jetty of dead coral. 4 men waded in waist-deep water, unloading crates from a cargo hold. For 9 days, the castaways had seen no living soul other than one another. Now, rescuers with a plane. Luke's heart was pounding in his ears so loudly that he could barely hear his own voice. Hey, over here, over here! Charla and Ian began jumping and bellowing. The 4 men continued ferrying their cargo. No one looked up. We're too far away, Ian exclaimed, his throat hoarse from shouting. Charla was in full panic. Let's go over there. She started down the steep slope to the next cove so fast that the others following her tripped and fell and rolled all the way to the beach. They sprinted along the shore, running an anchor leg of a long race. Down at sea level, they could no longer see the plane and its 4 occupants, but Luke kept a vivid picture of them in his mind. It gave his feet wings as they started up the incline right behind Charla. This was it. Beyond the rise lay rescue. The slope was rocky, but shorter and much less steep than the last one. Charla leaped expertly from foothold to foothold. Luke was hot on her heels. His hands and knees bled from the sharp coral formations, but he didn't care. Nothing mattered. Nothing except reaching those men. He could see the top now, just a few feet away. Charla was already reaching for it. Bang! A shot echoed 6 times before Luke stopped counting. His arm snaked out, grabbed Charla by the back of her shirt, and pulled her down beside him. At the same instant, he used his other hand to hold Ian in his track. What's the matter with you? Charla shrilled. We're almost there. That was a gunshot, Luke hissed. No, it wasn't, she argued. Maybe it's a plane backfire or something. Maybe, Luke said doubtfully, but we've got to find out one way or another before we let them know we're here. Carefully this time, they crept up at the top and peered over the peak. There was the seaplane. But now there were only 3 men waiting in the lagoon, and one of them, a tall cadaver's figured was bright red hair, was holding a small snub-nosed revolver. Where's the other guy? Charla whispered urgently. Then they saw him, floating face down in the clear water of the lagoon. He wasn't moving. They ducked back from the top of the hill. Silently, they put together the sights and sounds from the last few minutes and realized that they equaled death. Charla looked from face to face. What? You're not saying we're not going down there? We just witnessed a murder, Luke insisted, and those guys did it. I don't think they're going to be really psyched to see us. Okay, so they finally see people. The first time in 9 days, they're so pumped. Yes, people. They're running to the people. Gunshot. Oh, look. Now there's a dead person. Okay, obviously, if you witness a murder, now you're a witness to a crime, and maybe these guys are going to kill them. Why did they kill this guy? We have no stinking idea. But now there's murder. Nolan.
Wait, so you said there's 3 books, right?
Yes.
They don't get saved then. They do not get saved.
Yeah, I don't know. So anyways, there's murder now.
Because usually if it's this close of them with a plane, there would only be 2 books. But if there's 3, that means they get stuck there for longer. And the 3rd book tells them of when they get survived.
Smart thing. I won't testify against them, Charla, promise. I know that sounds selfish, but we're talking about our lives. Will's life. That's exactly why we can't go, Luke argued. Look, these are bad people. I don't know what they're doing or what's in those boxes, but if those guys kill one person, they'll have no problem killing us. Charla began to shiver. I'm sorry, she quivered, but this is so unfair. There are rescuers right here. We can't even go to them. We'll never see another plane. Never. It's unbelievable, agreed Ian, his voice hollow from shock and disappointment. It'd be better if nobody had come at all. Luke nodded grimly. He turned their dilemma over in his mind every which way, but it always came out the same. They would have to conceal themselves from these men. That was definite. But if he, Charla, and Ian were hiding, how could they ever hope to attract rescuers in the passing plane or boat? It was the only safe path. But would the following it commend them to a lifetime marooned on this terrible island? All right, we're going to stop there. Now they're in a bigger pickle. Not only are they stuck on an island, but they're stuck on an island with right now killers. So their life's terrible. I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a lovely day. Make sure you get all your work done that you need to get done.
Are we allowed to make our own Google Meets?
Not during school time.
After school?
I'm not answering that. I don't really know.
The answer to that is no.
Yeah, the answer to that is no. Get a FaceTime. FaceTime someone, okay?
We can't, Nolan, because I had one after school a long time ago from someone who sent it to me. Not going to name that person. But in the end, I did nothing, and I got in trouble for it. So,
Miss Kneifel hates me of doing this.
Yeah, I do. It's because I can't see your face. Okay,
Why
I gotta
you
go.
do it?
I have other work to do, so everyone get off. I'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, at least I have my own umbrella.
Okay, yeah, bye.